Morning,
Good
Rabbi,
morning.
and welcome back.
Thank you. This today's day of learning is sponsored by Barry Steinberg in memory of Philip Berkowitz.
My grandfather.
Hebrew name?
That's my grandfather.
Hebrew name?
Uh, Shragel Fagel ben Yosef.
Shagafayla ben Yosef. The Neshama Shaban Aliyah.
Amen.
Okay. Parak Ches, we're learning Mishnah Bava Kamma, Parak Ches, chapter 8, Mishnah Dal, Mishnah 4. Okay. So this Mishnah is talking about getting into fights with certain type of people. Okay? That's the case here. Got into a fight with the wrong person. Chayrish Shaita V'Katan. A person who is a deaf mute, insane, or a minor. Pigasan Ra. It is harmful to get into a fight with them. Not a good thing. In a monetary, not a good thing in general, but especially in a monetary sense. Why is that? Because if you damage them, you're liable. Meaning, as we've been learning, when one person damages another person, there are the potential of the 5 payments that you have to make for wounding the person. There's the nezek, tsar, ripu, sheves, boishes. Those 5 things. If you wound any one of these 3 people, you're going to be liable. You're going to be obligated to pay. But if they wound others, they're exempt. If these people wound somebody else, they're exempt. They're considered mentally incompetent. They're not responsible for their actions. So the point is, if you get into a fight with them, it's a way of saying, it's just a way of bringing out the point. But if you get in a fight with them, not a good thing, because if in the fight you wound them, you're going to be obligated to pay for wounding them. But if they wound you, they don't have to be obligated. Okay. Now, what's important? Let's read a little further. The same thing. Then again, into a fight with an eved Kanani, a Gentile slave, isha, or a woman, right? Bigasan Ra. There again, getting to a fight with them is not a good thing. If you damage them, you got to pay. Get into a fight with an eved Kanani, you have to pay his master the payments for what you pay them to the master, because the point is that in eved Kanani, whatever he acquires goes to the master. But if you get into a fight with him, you have wounded him, you're obligated to pay him. Just that whatever he gets goes to his master. Isha, or if let's say you wound a woman, you have to pay too. So therefore, those who damage them are liable. If they damage others, they're exempt. Why are they exempt? Why are the slave or the woman exempt? Because they don't have any money to pay. An eved Kanani has no ownership of his own money. A woman's property, whatever a woman has, her husband has a right to use it, if not completely own it, and therefore they don't have anything to pay with. Aval, the Mishnah says, Mishalmin la'achar zman, but they could pay at a later point of time, which is Niskar Sho Isha, if the woman got divorced or widowed, no more husband in the picture anymore, so the money is completely hers. Nishtachar Eved, or if the slave became free, so again now he has his own means of having money, Chayavin L'Shalim, then they will become obligated to pay. Meaning, when it comes to the women, to the eved Kanani, essentially they are obligated. If they wound somebody else, they're obligated. The eved Kanani is obligated in the mitzvahs of the Torah like a woman. So he essentially is obligated to pay for the wounding that he did. The woman is essentially obligated for the wounding that she did. The problem is they have no money. Okay, once they get money, once they have the means of acquiring money, then they have to pay. They've never been exempt. There was no means of doing it. Even though the wording is the same as the first case, but the point is that, again, if you wound them, you're going to have to pay. If they wound, they're not going to have to pay, but at a later time, they could end up paying. Unlike the first case of the cherish or the shait or the katan, in those cases, those people are mentally incompetent. They're not even obligated for what they did. So let's say the minor grows up, right? So now he has his own money. Doesn't have to pay because he was never obligated. If somehow or another the insane person, straightens out, comes back to his senses, he's not going to have to pay, because it wasn't about they didn't have the money. They're not obligated. They're not responsible for their actions. So that's why in the first case it says Paturin, finished, done, right? No mention of anything later on. But when it comes to the woman or to the slave, in that case, at a later point of time, they're going to they could, if they come to a point where they do have money, then they would have to pay. Okay. Now they bring down here very interestingly, at the time of the injury, meaning in a sense, let's say the injury came from the slave or from the woman. So at the time of the injury, the court assesses the 5 payments and gives the victim a written record of them, so that he will be able to collect from the Canaanite slave or the woman when he or she has the means to pay. But what are you going to do? Can we walk, a couple of years later, going to walk up to them and say, "Hey, you remember when you beat me up? You got to pay me." How is he going to prove it? So the point is, at the time when it happens, they assess, because that's when they're obligated, and therefore he'll have a document to be able to show, to prove where they have the means to be able to go and demand payment from them. Okay, let's see the next Mishnah. Mishnah 5. Hamake Aviv v'Imai. This Mishnah is going to be the opposite of cases that we had previously. Hamake Aviv v'Imai. If somebody strikes his father or mother of Asman Chabura, and he made a wound in them, a wound means he draws blood or makes a bruise. Now, in that situation, if somebody does that to a parent, they're chayiv misa. That act makes them liable to a death penalty. Or v'achevu b'chaver b'Shabbos, one who wounds his friend on Shabbos. Again, he wounds. He draws blood. He makes a bruise, which means that blood was drawn, and that too is considered an act of desecrating Shabbos according to Torah law. That is, and so that means he's also, but in both these cases, they have done acts that create a liability for a death penalty, and at the same time for a monetary payment. I mean, the father and the mother, you wounded them just like anybody else. Your friend on Shabbos, you wounded him. The wound is the same as any other day. So essentially, you should be obligated all the 5 payments. But the answer is Prata Mikulan. In all these cases, you are exempt from all of them. Why? Because at the end of the day, you are judged with your life, because he's judged with his life. Since there is a death penalty involved in this act, you do not become liable for the payment. If somebody wounds his own Gentile slave, Prata Mikulan, he's going to be exempt from everything. Why? Because when you pay to a slave, whatever he gets goes to his master. You're his master, so there's no point to paying.
He doesn't have to pay himself.
There's no right. You don't have to pay. You don't have to pay yourself. Interestingly, I want to just point out something else that the Bar Tanura. Now, first of all, number one, they bring down here in the notes. Although it is wrong for a master to even treat his Canaanite slave harshly, let alone wound him, which is halacha brought down. This is the halacha. They say see a Rambam Hilchas Avadim. The Rambam, when he brings down the laws about slaves, he brings down that it's wrong. You're not allowed to treat him harshly. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, for a technicality, you're going to be exempt from paying him, because since he's your slave, whatever he gets goes to you. Now, another point here that they bring down is, the Bartanur brings this down, on when the Mishnah said, if the person, let's say, wounds his father or mother, in the case where he wounds his friend on Shabbos. So the Bartanur points out, when you wound someone, right, it's called mekalkel. Any time, any desecration of Shabbos on a Torah level has to be called mesaken. It has to be for a constructive purpose. If it's just for a destructive purpose, that's not going to be a Torah. That's not a Torah prohibition. Not a Torah prohibition. If you go ahead and you okay, so again, in this case, you go ahead this is not this case because you have to be an answer to that. But any other case where you have mekalkel, you just again, I don't know an exact case right now, but at the end of the day, the Bar Tanura points out, this act of wounding your friend is mekalkel. It's an act of destruction. It's not a constructive act, seemingly. So, and the Mishnah says you don't have to pay because you're liable to death penalty. But if it's mekalkel, if it's considered an act of destruction, and that's not considered a Torah prohibition, then it's not liable for a death penalty. So why would you be exempt here? And that he answers, this quote, citing the Gemara, Mesakno eitzel yitzrei sheshachacha chamosai v'nach regzei bekach. Why'd you hit the guy? Because you're angry. You're angry at him. You're all worked up.
Mhm.
So after you hit him, you feel better. On that level, you were misakin. On that level, it's called constructive because you released your anger. You feel better. Doesn't mean it's right. But at the end of the day, if you want to know, is this going to be considered an act from the point of Hilchah Shabbos, the laws of Shabbos? Is this considered a constructive act? It's still considered a constructive act because of the fact that this act is basically you release your anger, you're calming your anger, you're calming yourself down. That gives it the status of a constructive act. Therefore, it would be liable to death penalty, and therefore, in that case, you'd be exempt from having to pay the payments to your friend who you wounded. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.